The rehearsal hall was a vaulted chamber of polished alloy and resonant wood, a space designed for acoustic perfection. It was filled with the 98 members of the Galactic Conservatory's Interstellar Choir, an assembly of beings from 12 star systems. In the center, standing on a low podium, was the choir director. He was a tall, elegant man from a race known for their precise auditory perception and a cultural arrogance that often accompanied it. His long fingers rested on the rail before him, tapping with a rhythm of pure impatience. "Stop. Just stop," he said, his voice a silken blade that cut through the discordant harmonies. The music died. The tonal alignment in the Phrygian passage is amateurish. The V-Arth contingent, "You are sharp." Again. His gaze, a luminous gray, swept the room and landed on the young human woman sitting quietly at the grand piano near the stage left wall. She was the new accompanist, a last-minute replacement from a little-known planet. Her name was simple, unassuming. She kept her eyes on her sheet music, her hands folded in her lap. "And you," the director said, the derision in his voice so faint only the most sensitive could detect it, but it was there. "The accompaniment there is too earthly, too heavy. It lacks celestial lightness. Can you not manage a more delicate touch? Or is the gravity of your world still weighing on your fingers?" A faint ripple of uncomfortable shifting moved through the choir. Some of the human members flushed. The woman at the piano merely nodded, her expression unreadable. She did not speak. She never spoke much. The director found it irritating. He had argued against her appointment, but the conservatory's board had insisted on including a human musician in this year's flagship performance. A token, he thought. A political piece of noise. For weeks, it continued. His criticisms of her were a constant, subtle underscoring to every rehearsal. The tempo is pedestrian. The phrasing lacks sophistication. Are you reading the notes or discovering them by accident? He never raised his voice, but the polite, precise contempt was more cutting than any shout. The choir grew used to it. A dreary background hummed to their practice. The human woman absorbed it all, her responses limited to slight nods or a whispered, "I understand." She seemed smaller each session, folding into herself. The day of the gala performance arrived. The great hall was a spectacle, filled with dignitaries, patrons, and the most celebrated artists in the galactic community. The choir stood in majestic, tiered formation, robes shimmering under the lights. The director stood before them, poised, ready to receive the acclaim for a year of his meticulous work. The human accompanist sat at the impressive concert piano, a sleek monument of crystal and wire, looking terribly alone. The performance began. It was technically flawless, a shimmering tapestry of synchronized sound. The director led with confident gestures, and the choir responded beautifully. The accompaniment was, as ever, perfectly adequate, perfectly invisible. The final piece, the director's own composition titled Cosmic Ascension, was the grand finale. It was a complex, demanding work designed to showcase the choir's range and his own genius. 2 minutes into the piece, it happened. A power surge, a brief but catastrophic flicker in the hall's sophisticated harmonic stabilizers. The director froze. The choir faltered. The intricate lattice of sound, which relied on precise field calibrations for the non-human vocalists, collapsed into a jumble of wrong pitches and discord. The stabilizers came back online a second later, but the damage was done. The musical structure was shattered. Panic flashed across the director's face. They could not stop. They could not start over. In that moment of profound public ruin, the human woman at the piano did not look up. Her hands, which had been following the composition faithfully, left the written music. They settled on the keys, not with force, but with a sudden, absolute certainty. A single clear note rang out, pure and anchoring. Then another, a simple, haunting progression that was not in the director's score. It was earth music. It was old, built not of stellar mathematics, but of soil and soul. A mournful, beautiful chord sequence that spoke of loss and resilience. The choir, bewildered, fell silent. The director stared, his mouth slightly open, his baton hanging uselessly. She began to play in earnest. What flowed from her fingers was not an accompaniment. It was a story. It started with a deep, resonant bass, a sound of profound gravity, of a world turning slowly in the dark. It built with a left-hand pattern that was the heartbeat of a planet, steady and undeniable. Then the right hand brought in a melody. It was not a tune one could whistle. It was a landscape. It was the first rains falling on ancient stone, the wind through tall grasses, the lonely cry of a creature across a vast plain, the joyful noise of a community gathered around a fire. It was humanity's memory, translated into sound. The piano, under her hands, ceased to be an instrument. It became a voice. It sang of oceans deep and skies wide, of quiet courage and roaring triumph, of love etched into the very bones of a species. The technique was not just flawless. It was transcendent. It had the delicate touch the director had sneered at, capable of notes so soft they were like thoughts. And it had a power that could shake the air, a power drawn from the very core of a world that had known struggle. The choir stood, mesmerized. A tenorin, whose voice box could produce 4 pitches at once, felt a strange, warm resonance in his chest. A V-arth, who perceived sound as layered color, saw hues she had never witnessed, deep indigos and vibrant, living golds. The human members of the choir had tears streaming down their faces. They heard home. The director's arrogance, his contempt, his entire worldview, crumbled under the weight of that music. He had sought to orchestrate the stars, but he had never listened to the story of a single stone. This was not mere talent. This was a history, a soul, poured out through 88 keys. He had mocked her gravity, and now he was being pulled into a gravitational well of emotion, so strong he could not breathe. He finally heard the music he had always been blind to, the music that was not about precision, but about truth. The woman played on, unaware of the effect. Her eyes were closed. She was not performing for the galaxy. She was simply speaking the only language that had never failed her. The piece swelled, climbed to a peak that was not a scream, but a declaration, then fell away into a resolution that was not an end, but a quiet, unwavering promise. The final note hung in the air, a vibration that seemed to live long after her fingers had stilled. There was no applause. There was a profound, reverent silence that stretched for a full 10 seconds. It was a silence louder than any noise, a collective intake of breath from 1,000 beings. Then sound returned. It was not the polite clapping of a gala, but a thunderous, roaring wave of emotion. Beings rose to their feet, not in planned ovation, but in a unified, visceral reaction. The choir, still on their stands, were the first to stand, their faces awash with awe. The director remained on his podium, a statue amidst the storm. He looked at the human woman. She had opened her eyes, slightly startled by the reaction, and gave a small, uncertain nod to the hall before turning her gaze back to the piano keys, as if seeking shelter there. In that moment, he saw not a token, not an inferior musician, but an artist of a depth he could never have fathomed. His ridicule seemed a petty, childish thing, now drowned in the ocean of her talent. He slowly lowered his baton. He did not take a bow. Instead, he turned to the woman, and with a humility he had never before possessed, he placed a hand over his heart, a gesture of deep respect from his culture. He then extended that hand toward her, ceding the stage, the triumph, the moment, entirely to her dot. The roar of the crowd doubled. The human woman, finally, looked up. She saw the director's gesture, saw the standing choir, saw the overwhelming response. A faint, shy smile touched her lips. She gave one small, gracious nod. It was the only sound she made that anyone would remember. The rest, the entire history and heart of her world, she had already said with the piano. And the galaxy, for the first time, had listened. And it had been left utterly, completely speechless.